Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley in Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally leads and offers public and private tours, as well as presentations throughout the state of Massachusetts. The communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the First Congregational Church of Indian Orchard, located in Springfield, Massachusetts. So, where is this church located exactly in Indian Orchard?
Right, it's on 91 Berkshire Street in that village of Indian Orchard in Springfield, Massachusetts. And it's very obvious it's a very heavily driven street, so it's easy to find this location. And the church has a very unique look to it. You have to see it to believe it, so I put a lot of pictures up. And now today we're going to talk about the history of the church, what architectural style it might have, and then what the church is nowadays in the present year, because it has changed. Now, why would you even have a First Congregational Church in Indian Orchard? Well, there were other Congregational churches in Springfield, but Indian Orchard was considered a very strong village, which means that it needed its own organizations, repeated all over again. And so, when you built another Congregational church inside of Springfield in a new village like Indian Orchard, and it was the first one, that's where you get the name, First Congregational Church of Indian Orchard.
And what is the history of this church?
Okay, so it's society, which is the people that made it up, and without the church yet, was brought together in 1848. So they got their covenant for their congregation going in that year. It wasn't until 1863 that this church was actually built. So for 15 years, they held their masses inside of probably a person's house. And then this was built, and that's quite old. That would make that 161 years old at this point. And if you see it, it's very obviously well taken care of, and it must have always been that way. And the church is not quite the same on the same group. Now, our next question is going to talk about architectural style, which is going to include not only the rectory next to it, but it's also going to include the bell tower that's with the church. And that bell tower is very unique looking.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find podcasts and videos of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for other inquiries or private tours, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what is the architectural style of the buildings?
Alright, so all these wonderful buildings have a beautiful style to it. You might want to call the church nave itself an Italianate structure, and it has one fairly medium-sized spires off to the side. It doesn't have a true crucifix, but it might have had one in the past, because the tip of the gable has such, but it has a spiral look above each of the very tiny, narrow stained glass windows. And then even the portal of the church has the Italianate look to it. Now, off to the right side of the church, attached to it, you have a bell tower. And it fits in very well with the style or the look of the church itself. The windows are in the belfry is in the Romanesque style or rounded style. Now, there is a rectory off to the right, and that continues. The portal arrow is very much the same, The windows are very different, though. They're straight top windows. And so overall, all the structures looks very unique. Now, along the backside is the transept, or the cross part of the church. And there is where you have the larger stained glass windows, especially on the second floor. And then there's 4 windows wide within the body of the church on the side. And they're kind of narrow, but they're not as narrow as the front of the church. So those windows are incredibly narrow.
And what is the church nowadays?
Nowadays, still a beautiful church, still very, very well taken care of, with a nice rectory. And nowadays it's called the Orchard Covenant Church, and they have a webpage for themselves, orchardcovenant.org, where you can read more about the services that they provide to the community. All right, now, there's such a well taken care of place, so for that reason you might want to go visit. One thing that I find most unique about the whole thing, well, 2 of them, is that bell tower. Very unique look to it. And then above the main door, about 20 feet up, there's a hexagonally shaped window. And inside of it seems to be a stained glass. And I always want to be able to go inside and figure out from the inside what that stained glass is. But this church, even nowadays, seems to be maintaining the building, including the stained glass, up to a very high level. And that is wonderful to see, because that means that the congregation is very active in all different ways.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you for tuning in.